Hello, hello. Welcome to Meditation Nerd. I'm glad you're here. I hope you're doing well. So today I have just a couple things that I wanted to talk about. No meditative practice, unless you'd like to just sit with how things land in your body as I'm talking about the different aspects. I wanted to share some insights that I gleaned from Robert Wright's Why Buddhism is True. Um, Now, while he does speak extensively about Buddhism, I highly recommend reading the book. I really enjoyed the conversation that kind of kicked off within me, the notes I was taking, the questions that it was bringing up. Um, so while he does focus on Buddhism, I'm going to be speaking specifically about meditation here, because I feel much more comfortable and confident in that regard. I am not a Buddhist scholar. I'm very much a lay Buddhist in that regard, so I don't really want to touch on that. Some things that I found very interesting about what um, Robert Wright was talking about was in the first little bit of the book, he talks about or alludes to there being a right way to meditate or reach enlightenment. He has a lot of great stories about his own personal experiences, and I started to think about my own meditation journey and just how it kind of unfurled. And for me, there is no right way. It's been largely different pieces coming together, which I've shared here, where I've paired mantras with EFT tapping and mantras with the somatic experience. Byron Katie's The Work is always undergirding all of this. When things get really, really heavy and I'm unable to stay either with the mantra or the somatic experience, I reach for is this true to help me stay present with where I am. And so all of these different pieces for me were necessary for me to be able to continue with the meditative practice, to continue with deepening, to following it wherever it needed to go. So in case there's anybody else there that's getting into this belief about there's only one way to do it, I would just like to respectfully disagree. I don't think that there is. Now, that's not to say that meditative practice should exclude ethics or boundaries or that's not what I mean here. I mean, because I believe that for my own approach to this, ethics were important, boundaries were important. Trusting the teachers that I was working with, that was important, right? So those are non-negotiable. I just mean it's okay if you need to add in different styles of meditation, like visualization meditations, or maybe you like Zen practices. Maybe you want to bring in some yin yoga to help you release those muscles as you're sitting with the mantra, right? There's these different pieces that you can bring together to help you continue with your practice, to help you deepen your practice, that type of thing, while of course honoring your boundaries, staying within your window of tolerance. Part of why I was reading about trauma informed mindfulness or trauma sensitive mindfulness was I wanted to make sure that I was broadening the practice and I was aware of different signs, and not just for myself, also so that I'm aware for others. Again, not as an expert, not to diagnose or do any of that, just so that I have an understanding of what some of the problems that arise can look like when it's trauma um, specific. I'm just completely lost my trail. I'm going to leave that sentence kind of half done there. Um, Now he does, Robert Wright does circle back to clarify that he doesn't necessarily think that there's, you know, one way to do it. He does speak, about how mindfulness meditation specifically is what helps him. So I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, just these were some of the insights that I was reflecting on for my own practice. Part of why this came up for me was because I do still feel kind of vulnerable about bringing these pieces together. Um, and then he brings up now, while enlightenment, he's specifically speaking in terms of Buddhism, right? Mahayana and the Theravada, he does break down the two differences. I want to speak a little bit about enlightenment, just specifically with the meditative forms that I use. And he kept referring to it as like an endpoint. And I think that's obvious. We typically, the way I was introduced when I first started meditating, reading about Buddhism, that type of thing, enlightenment was always an endpoint, right? Nirvana is always an endpoint. It's these things we strive for, which I'm not, no issue with that. I'm not throwing shade at any of that. I just realized that within my own practice, that's not at all what my experience has been. It's not some distant point that I may or may not reach. Enlightenment has come in different forms. Um, and Robert Wright shares a really interesting experience that he had. While I don't share the intensity that his experience was, I do understand in like the incremental insights that I've had throughout my time meditating. And I just wanted to kind of offer a new way to look at enlightenment as it's a lived experience. It's something that continues to happen each time you meditate. Um, and this is largely, again, based on my own experience. This has been very much an incremental step type style. That being said, that's because that's what I can handle, right? I don't know, as he was sharing some of the stories of his own experience, I started to really question whether or not I could handle a similar experience. And I don't know that I could, given where I am currently. Um, and not that it would like unravel my meditative practice or do any damage in that sense, more like I feel it would it would take away from all the progress that I've made, because I feel like I would start to chase that moment. And while it sounds really cool, and again, not trying to diminish anyone's experience or anything like that, just my own personal reflection was that the incremental for me works much better. So, just in case you're someone that's also having these incremental experiences, I would also ask you to question whether or not that would, what that would bring to your meditative practice. And can you actually ask, would I benefit from this? Would I be able to handle that, right? Some real honest self-reflection on whether or not you could handle it. So I found that really helpful, and I really enjoyed having that inner discussion with myself and just being honest about the fact that I don't think I would. As much as I would love to experience it at least once, I don't know that this place is the best place for me to do that. So maybe further along. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up was, so this was more in his end notes, not so much in the body of the book itself. He talks about activism. Now, this is specific to Buddhists, where he thinks that, once he felt that it was disappointing that there weren't more people doing activism. Now, I don't know, he didn't really clarify, like I said, this was more in the end notes. He didn't really clarify by what he means as activism. And I don't know if I just read into it being Buddhists specifically, because that's largely what he's talking about, paired with meditation, or if it's just anyone that meditates. Um, so, with that being said, what I wanted to speak about a little bit here was just what stopped me when I read the end notes was, how do you know that someone isn't doing small activism within their community? Showing up to volunteer is a form of activism. Showing up to help in any way you can is a form of activism. It doesn't need to necessarily be these big, huge, grand scale style activism, right? Not that that's not needed. Again, not throwing shade at anybody. I'm just, it really made me stop and question, because I do that too, where it's like I see the bigger things and go, oh, well, I mean, they've got it because they've got this whole huge thing. And it's like, well, that whole huge thing is made up of all of these people doing small incremental things, right? So grassroots come together because of small individual acts, not big giant grandiose things necessarily. So I just I wanted to speak about that. Just because I feel like focusing on the big giant grand stuff can be detrimental to the small incremental steps that we take. And this is kind of an across the board statement. It doesn't just apply to activism. If you notice and you reflect on sometimes where you focus so much on the bigger goal that you were looking for, or the big grand thing, how easy was it to lose sight of the little steps, right? How easy was it to feel that those little incremental steps weren't enough, or didn't add up to much, or you see what I'm saying? It led me into this deeper question of the balance in between the two, and is how can I better balance respecting and valuing the small incremental steps that are needed and required in order to get to the bigger goal, whatever that is, right? So I really found his book very engaging. I really loved how he broke everything down. It was an incredible conversation that it started within myself. Like I said, my notes that I was taking and just some of the questions that I was sitting with and reflecting on, and realizing just how far my practice has come. Um, so I just thought I would put this out there in case anyone else needed to hear that incremental isn't quote unquote bad. It's, reflect on where you are and if a bigger experience would actually benefit you where you currently are. Um, and just that, again, there's no right way to do this. I don't think that any style of meditation is superior or inferior. It's really just what works, because that's ultimately what's going to make you better. It's going to help you balance yourself more effectively. You know what I mean? All of the benefits that come from meditation, grounded in ethics, not spiritual bypassing, not the navel gazing, none of that. I mean, that's going to include the tough questions, the awkward silences, the challenge of sitting with emotions that nobody wants to, right? Nobody likes chilling with shame or humiliation. So that's included, that's part of this journey. So um just kind of wanted to dispel that a little bit. I don't know how many people need to hear that, or if that's even really a common refrain at this point. Just some of the ways that Robert Wright was framing certain things, it was just interesting because this kept coming back, where it's like, well, there is no right way to do this, though. There's, just because you're coming at it from one end and someone else is coming at it from the other, neither of those is right or wrong. It's simply that that's how you met in the middle, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, Robert Wright was coming from the point of a psychologist, right? He was thinking of this in the frame of psychology. So that framing is always interesting, as far as how some questions keep getting circled versus if it's a sociologist or just a practitioner or a scholar. So that was very fun to see just how the questions were framed, and how he admitted he kept circling certain questions repeatedly just to make sure he got it right. Anyway, I highly recommend you read the book in case you're curious about that. It was a very engaging read. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about it. Let me double check, make sure there was nothing else. Yeah, I think I said everything. Just reinforces the meditative pieces that I put together to build out my meditative practice as a whole. And maybe if you're feeling stuck, give yourself some breathing space and see if reframing how you're looking at it, instead of, enlightenment as an end goal, you can see the small moments of enlightenment that you're having. Maybe, you know, you're maybe it's something simple. You don't just instantly snap while driving or standing in line or needing to wait longer when you're in a rush, that type of thing, because that is enlightenment, right? You're not as tense as you were before. Yes, it isn't the grand one that we're all striving for, right? It is still liberation from the habitual whatever it is that you're looking to let go of. So maybe take some more deep breaths in that moment and celebrate that success. Maybe that will help kind of free up a little bit of the stuck energy, and perhaps maybe shake it up, try a different form or tradition of meditation and see if that helps. Add it in, pair it up, like I've done with other traditions. See if that helps. So that's all I have today. I hope you found this helpful, at least a little bit enjoyable. Hopefully the audio didn't go wonky today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.